Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time of the day you're listening to this. Welcome to another recording of Invincible You. My guest today was the lovely Amy Codd, and the subject we covered was grief. You know, it's a subject that we quite often try and steer away from. So today, myself and Amy really looked at grief. We looked at Amy's experience of grief, Amy's loss a few years ago, and how the support networks Amy put in place for both her and her children, and how that worked out. Amy talks really honestly during this recording, so I really hope you enjoy it and take something from it. So we have a guest in the room. We have the lovely Amy Codd. Hi Amy, thank you for being here.
Good morning, it's lovely to be here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for stepping forward with this subject that I'm really excited about recording about. Just before we kind of dive into the subject, just tell people a little bit about who you are and actually why you wanted to step forward as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Amy Codd, as you've already said. The thing I'm most passionate about is my family. I have a lovely husband and 3 beautiful children. I'm also passionate about Newark. I've been involved with the Newark Business Club for quite a few years now on different levels. I've gone from being chairman to making the cups of coffee, which you're equally good at, I suppose. And really, for me, it's a subject I'm quite close to my heart. I'm a trustee of the Children's Bereavement Centre in Newark. And I think, as we'll explore in a moment, the reasons that came about and the reason I became involved with that was something that we as a family needed to do, which is why we're here this morning.
Perfect. So we're going to talk about grief, aren't we?
We are. Subject that nobody really wants to talk about, but everyone should.
It's we kind of said off screen a little bit that for me it's such an under talked about subject and feels like a subject sometimes people get fearful of.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think again, we did touch on it at the start, a subject that everyone thinks they can deal with on their own behind a very closed door and get no help, because perhaps people don't know how to ask or who to ask, or even if they can ask, if that makes sense. And sometimes opening that door is very difficult, and you have to open yourself up to something that you don't want to talk about anyway, but it's making that initial step, I think. Well, for me, that's how it was for me.
Yeah, I think people get fearful of the pain that they feel that they're going to have to experience or expose themselves to.
Yeah.
And that's true. It is painful. Do you know what I mean? I think I always remember a client being with me and just like, oh my goodness, it's like tidal waves that just rip through my chest.
Yeah.
So then what she would do, she'd go, oh, I can't do that. And then she'd divert and go and do something else. So therefore it just got stuck.
Absolutely.
And we had to get to a point where I was like, we have to sit through this together. We
Yeah.
have to sit through this pain.
Yeah. I think that's a really good description, actually, because you're all right, and it almost hurts. It almost is there all the time, and you think you'll just walk around with that for however long it's needed. And I can remember having made the step and gone to get some help, thinking I'm very good at talking, Kevin, as you know. So I thought I would just sit there, talk for 45 minutes, and it would all be fixed. And I just cried for 45 minutes. Absolutely ridiculous. You know, I didn't say anything really. I probably just said my name, and that was it. And after coming out thinking, well, that didn't go very well, Amy, because you didn't say anything. But actually, it's the first bit, isn't it? That's the first. Yeah. I've got to sort of get rid of some of this, because if I don't get rid of some of this, it's going to drown. And that's how, for me, it felt at the start.
Well, it's like you're kind of punching at your chest there, because it gets stuck there, doesn't it? And it's just like, then it builds up this pressure.
Yeah, absolutely.
So for you, what was the point that you went, I can't do this on my own?
Yeah, I think so. So it all came about by way, just to give you a little bit of background. So it was my mum that had died. Mm-hmm. And so mum had died. She'd been quite poorly. It was very traumatic end of life. And I'd got 3 lovely children who were incredibly close to my mum. And so I'd got to try and help them and also myself. And that's where I struggled. For me, I couldn't help them. I had no room left. I had no room to actually help them at all. And I didn't know how to cope with how I was feeling. And I know I was not very nice to Nick, my husband. I know it was terrible, because I didn't know how to channel what was inside of me. Yeah. And so for me, that's how it came about. And I can remember thinking, I've got to try and get someone to help with this. Not having a clue what to do, not a clue. And thinking, well, I've got to take that first step. And for me, the hardest part was that first phone call to say, I rang and said, can I speak to somebody? Of course you can. And I met a lovely lady called Barbara, and for me that was it. And I can remember later on we went to a quiz. It was one of the local hospices that I went to, and Nick and I were doing the quiz, and Barbara was there, and Nick said to Barbara, "Thank you for giving me my wife back." And that for me was that first step.
So I guess for the purposes of people listening, where did you go to? What did you decide for you was the place to go to?
Yeah, I went to a doctor first. I went to the doctor and talked to the doctor, who said, "Why don't you go and speak to somebody?" And so I went to St Barnabas in Grantham, and they do it's all free. You go and speak to one of their trained counsellors, and they've often had very similar circumstances. So the lady I spoke to had been through not the same, but obviously the similar circumstances. And like I say, I met Barbara every Wednesday afternoon for about a year. So it was there I went. And actually, my dad also went there to a group session. Now, I couldn't possibly, that for me, making the move and speaking to Barbara was enough. Actually, a group session wouldn't have been for me. I've been absolutely terrified to say anything. So I went to there, and I went every Wednesday afternoon and just sat and talked to Barbara, sometimes about nothing in particular. But for me, that's where I went. And like I say, and then the children. So again, they didn't go there. They went to the Children's Bereavement Centre. They were little. Well, not little, they were younger. And actually, they make the most beautiful memory books. Now, at the time, they thought they were just going to make these books, that they had no clue that actually there was this hidden agenda underneath. So they went and made these most beautiful books about my mum, and they gradually teased out the bits that they needed to talk about, which was, Isaac was only young, Josh was older, Daisy in the middle. But for them, those books they'll always treasure. But actually, it was what went on behind the scenes that they could talk about. They knew they couldn't talk to me, so they got the help that they needed by doing that as well.
Yeah, it's such a great charity, the Children's Bereavement Centre. I also kind of work with them through the sidelines. I supervise one of their practitioners, so I have a kind of inroad there. I should clarify what loss is and what grief is. No, what grief is, because sometimes that gets confused as well. And I always say to people, grief is loss. And although at the minute we're talking about the loss of a person, grief can be attached to the loss of almost anything, from a piece of jewelry to a pet, to a person, to an identity, a relationship. Oh my goodness, loss is loss. You know what I mean? And we grieve all of those things. Yeah. For the purposes of this, we are definitely talking about the loss of a loved one. But again, I want to say that because it gets confused, and people are like, "Well, how can I be grieving the loss of a piece of jewelry?" I'm like, because it was special to you, and it was really important to you, and it's how the link is the attachment. It's the attachment you make to whatever it is, and then you lose it.
And I think that's really key, isn't it? That there's various things out there, whatever it is, and I think you can't put in a box what is important to you, and your loss is yours. But to the next person, it can be that devastation when a dear pet dies, or it can be the loss of something else. And like you say, you almost put that grief because it's a person. It can be just as wide, and it can be just as widespread for anybody. Like you say, especially having gone through the change in the last year, people's roles have changed, people's circumstances, jobs perhaps aren't there. So there's all of that. It's all encompassing, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Did you, sometimes when I'm working with people with grief, I quite often see this almost like an unconscious avoidance, where they just get so busy and they focus on everybody else. And the thing is about when we lose somebody and they're ill, whilst they're ill, we are usually focused on looking after the said person, and then they pass, and then we focus on the funeral arrangements and saying goodbye and making sure that's okay, and then we focus on everybody around us, and then we go back to work.
Yeah, and that was me all over. That was entirely me. My mum died on the Thursday. I went back to work on the Monday. And for me, it was about being busy. And that was my choice. It wasn't work's choice, it was my choice. Because if I'm busy, and if my mind's going on other things, I haven't got to think about this massive hole that's there. So you fill it with being busy, you fill it with all of those things. But what you don't realise at the time is it's still there. And when you sit down at whatever o'clock or early in the morning for me, it's still there, and you can't fill that gap. And that, I read a lot. I can remember waking up in the night and just reading. Because I read, all I could hear in my mind was that book. I just read and read and read loads of books. Because if I stopped and then thought about anything, that gaping hole's still there. I think we're all guilty of that, whether it be work or where it be, whatever we choose to do. I think you and I have spoken before, you don't give your mind time to actually be still and then concentrate what's important.
No, because quite often when the mind's still, that is, if there is pain or any kind of trauma there, that's when it appears.
Yeah.
So people then learn, again, unconsciously, to keep the mind busy and active.
Yeah. And I think even when you and I have spoken before, and the bits you've done even at the business club and things like that, to take some time and to breathe, and then it's that little voice is still in there when you actually do start to do that, and then you're quiet. But I think certainly for me, that's the bit, isn't it? That's the bit you've got to then make that conscious effort to do that and allow yourself to do that, rather than thinking about what's going on the Tesco shopping list or what's going on. I do Pilates. At the end of that, we often have some time to just be quiet and still. And we joked around the first time I went, because I said, well, that's my Tesco shop planned. And that's it for me. Everyone else is lying there thinking serene thoughts. I'm thinking, right, well, what do we need for supper? Because again, it takes us back to, if I'm busy, I haven't got to think about anything.
Yeah. I quite often see busy people, and I just look at them and go, what are you running from?
Yeah, I think that's it.
What are you hiding from? Tell me. So Barbara sounds wonderful. I love Barbara.
Yes,
I love that her name's Barbara.
Yeah.
Tell me what it was about being with Barbara in that space. Why did that allow you to then be able to process?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think to start with, it was just, I needed somewhere it all had to come out. And I think everybody in the role, and you'll know absolutely, Barbara didn't often say very much. She didn't often say, she opened the door for me almost. Like she unlocked it and opened it a tiny bit and allowed me to push it open. Yeah. But I think for me, I could talk to Barbara. Barbara didn't know any of my circumstances. She didn't know any of my family. She didn't know anything at all about me. So I could tell her absolutely anything and everything. And that for me was ideal, because I said probably all the things that I was feeling. And Barbara never judged or said, well, that's ridiculous. It might be something really, really silly, that I've said, and we're all guilty of going back and saying, I never should have said that. And then she was always almost very rational as well, and quite fierce at times when she'd say, hey, we've talked about this before, you can't change that, it's done, you're gonna have to stop. Because again, for me, it's going over and over and over. But actually, when she said, look, we've talked about it, we've decided that you said it, you perhaps shouldn't have done, but you did it in the moment, and allowed me then to think, yes, that is right, actually. It is right. That bit of guilt can be let go. Yeah. So I think for me, it was a safe space, a space I could tell and talk about anything I wanted to. And I think that was the biggest thing, really. It was that safe space. And you go in, again, you'll know all about this, but you go in and think, well, I've got nothing to say. I'm not going to be able to talk about anything for 45 minutes. There's no way, I've got nothing to give here. And then at that point you think, well, that's the end. Oh, right. I must have been waffling on then.
I love it when that happens. I can't tell you how many times we've got to the end of a session and the client's kind of gone, oh, is that it? Are you done?
Yeah.
Well, where did that time go? And I'm like,
I know. Yeah.
Or sometimes they'll arrive and go, I had no idea what I was going to talk about today. No idea.
No, and that was when I first went, I came to a point where I knew I couldn't manage on my own. I couldn't do it on my own. And I had to make that step to say, you know what, Amy, you're going to have to get someone to talk about this with. And so for me then, when I'd made that decision, and I think that's the key as well. I think I had an appointment in a week or 2 weeks. So again, it was very quick. And then, like I say, when I got there, I'd almost got my mind in there that I was going to go and talk to somebody. So that for me gave me the opportunity to go and actually speak to somebody and to lay it all out there, as it were. But as well for the children, actually going and saying to because the doctor suggested the bereavement centre for them. But that was completely different. They just needed somewhere to go and celebrate my mum. They needed somewhere to go and remember all the fabulous things that they did with her. Not in a sad way. It was never a sad thing for them. It was absolutely celebrating what was special about my mum to them. And I think that those books they've made, they'll cherish forever. You know, the things they put in there, the photos and the things. But actually afterwards, that allowed me with them to talk about the positive things, the things we did well. We'd talk at the end, we'd look at the picture. Oh, do you remember when we did this? Or do you remember when Nana said that? And so actually it allowed me that time with them. I didn't have, because all I could think about this awful event. I could only think about that awful day and not think about anything before that, and that wonderful close relationship we had before that. And I think that's the biggest thing I would say. By going and getting some help, I stopped thinking about that horrible Thursday morning. And I was able to think about all those other things we did. Do you remember when we did this? Do you remember when we did that? And that for me was the biggest blessing, that it gave me the opportunity to be thankful and positive again, rather than just carry this massive boulder around about the horrible Thursday morning.
Yeah, because if the loss is traumatic, and I've dealt with this before, it can be all consuming. I worked with somebody once who had a memory. They had a memory stuck in their head, and it was just this one memory, and it completely overshadowed everything that had happened. This one memory, this one look. And we managed through, I think we did it through EMDR, which is an amazing little model that I now use in therapy. Stands for eye movement desensitization and reprogramming, but it's really acute at clearing a piece of trauma. It's very, very clever. And that's just what this client needed, to clear this one piece of trauma, because then behind the trauma was the grief. The grief couldn't get past that point of trauma. So we had to clear that. Which worked like a dream.
Yeah.
How long was it before? The gap between mum passing and then you seeking out. What was the gap there?
Probably about 3 or 4 months. It was a while. It was a while, because I thought I would. Bear in mind, we all, you and I both know. So my work, I'm a private client solicitor, so I deal with this all the time. My job is, when people have died, I'm the one that sorts everything out. So in my mind, I know how to do this. I do it every day. Of course I can do it on my own. Why wouldn't I be able to do it? And that was my trouble. I thought I could do it on my own, and I thought there's no way. I saw it. There's no way I'm going to need any help. That's almost, I can't think of any other word, but weak to ask for help. That's how I felt. Why would I need that? And actually, that was part of the problem, because I thought I could do it all myself. So it was a while, because I had to sort of think, no, I can't. And actually, that probably made me better at what I do, because when I see people now, I can think, and I do know what you're going through. And when they talk about that time, perhaps before I had an idea, but I couldn't really. I said all the right words in the right voice, that quiet, calming voice. But actually, I didn't know what I could say. Look, I know, and now I can say, I know exactly what you're going through, and I can cry. I'm a bit of a heart on the sleeve, and if someone cries, and I can cry and say, I've been there, I know, and it does it made me better at what I do.
Yeah, I was just thinking then how absolutely perfect you must be in that role, just perfect.
All the time, not all the time, but I'm much more. The empathy that I have is much more, and as well, sometimes if people have got children, I can say, look, I'm not saying what this is right, but for me, the right thing to do was to get some help for children, or for me, and I'm very upfront, and we'll chat about the help I got, because thank goodness I did. Thank goodness it was available for me. And if that is what helps somebody else, then I can actually say, no, I need to. And then they think, crikey, you sat there with your hair done, you've got your lipstick on in your suit, although not at the moment, because my dresses are slightly tight. They've shrunk, let me tell you. They've shrunk since last year.
Mine too. Not my dresses.
No, I was going to say. But for me, I can say that, and I'm not saying it just for saying it. I'm saying, it's really, really hard, but the day will be better. And I think, again, we've talked about this. It's the small things. You find what's good for you. And we were talking at the beginning. I'm not a big gardener at all, but I can go outside and potter for an hour. And for me, then it's that deep breath and thinking, it's okay today.
Space.
Yeah.
space. There's something really valuable about being outside and just pottering a little bit. When I asked you what the gap was between mum passing and you seeking some sort of assistance, and you said 3 months, and you went, that's quick.
Yeah.
That's really quick. I worked with somebody years ago who there was a 10-year gap, and although the pain was less acute, whenever we mentioned in here the person that had passed, tears would come immediately. And I know
Yeah.
that if I'm working with somebody, it doesn't matter whether it's a month, 2 years, 10 years, 15 years, if there is tears immediately, then I know that it hasn't been processed.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
every time we mentioned it, and I went, "You've not processed that, have you?" And she kind of went, "No, I don't think so." And I was like, and then I went, "Okay, so let's put that on a list of to do." And even then, I think it was about Mr. Gabatas.
No.
Mr. Gabatas interrupting our recording.
That's all right. My husband's bought my fruit already, so we were doing the same this way.
And every time we mentioned it, she kind of burst into tears. But then what happened was the client had to bring it back in. The client had to bring it into the room. So what I did was I went, "Look, that's sat there. We know it's sat there. I'm not going to mention it again. And I want you to bring it to me." And then after about 15 weeks, the client walked in and went, "Okay, I'm ready."
Yeah.
And we did it, and we did what we had to do, and we went through it, and the 2 or 3 sessions, it was processed. I escorted her to the grave because I could do that, and because she said, "I've never been, and don't want to go," and yeah, but I do want to go, but I don't want to go. And I went, "How about I meet you there, and we work it out from there?" And I about 50 yards, I went, "Okay, so I'm going to stay here, but you'll be able to see me, and I'll be right there." And that's just what she needed. And after that, she went every week.
Yeah.
Just needed that, somebody to say, "It's all right, you've got this." But that was 10 years. So 3 months was pretty quick.
No, I knew, like I say, I knew it was all moving too fast. I knew that I just got to that point where I knew that I needed to go and speak to somebody. And I think, like you say, as soon as I walked in, that was it for me. It was almost like, I know I did. I cried for about 45 minutes. I don't think I made any coherent sense whatsoever, apart from to say, "Hello, Barbara, I'm Amy." And then that was it. Poor Barbara must have thought, "Crikey, what on earth is going on here?" And that was exactly the same for me. But I'd almost knew that it was so close to, the dam was so close to bursting. Yeah. I knew it was. I'd got to go and get and secure something, just someone to talk to. And while I was there, I had a dear friend that died during the process. And it's almost, thank goodness, that we were already talking about things, because that again was something that I could talk to her about. But no, I think for me, and it was not brave, I wasn't, but it was the most sensible thing I did, to go and speak to somebody. And I think if that's the only thing we can share this morning, that's the most important bit, because it is making that step, it's opening that door, it's finding, it might not even be someone you need to go like I did. It might be a friend or your also in the family. But there was an awful lot of family dynamics that I needed to talk about. There's a lot of stuff that had gone on, during the whole time, really. So therefore, it wasn't right that I spoke to somebody that knew me. I always needed someone that could be completely separate from me. And that's probably because you think, well, I'm not overloading everybody. My dad was going through his own journey, and for me, it needed to be someone I could just tell everything to, completely away from the family. And that was really important. That was for me, that there was, whatever I was talking about or how I was feeling, it didn't matter, because Barbara didn't know who I was talking about. She didn't know my mum. She didn't know my family. She didn't know what I was. It was never, and that for me was really important. That I could be completely separate. It was just, I needed it to be separate.
It's impartial, isn't it? And that's why
exactly.
That's why this process works so brilliantly, because we are impartial, and also we see things very differently in terms of we look in on your world, but we're not a part of your world, so we're not emotionally attached like that. You almost used the word brave then. And really interesting.
Stop very quickly.
you pulled away from it, and I want to go back to it and say, For me, it is an act of bravery, because when we know something's going to be so painful and we step into it, for me, that's brave. There is an act of bravery there.
Maybe. I think for me it was desperation. I'm not sure. For me, I think it
Yeah.
was that I'd got to start that process. Yeah, and I think I don't think it was particularly brave, but I think that takes you right back to that's still that barrier where we don't want to ask, where we don't think we should, and we think we should be able to do it ourselves. And I think there's always that element, and it will never go away. You think, well, I didn't do it, I didn't manage to do it myself. You've got to get over that. For me, it was like, why on earth can't it? What's wrong with you? All these people manage. Why can't you do it? So I don't think it was particularly brave, but I definitely know it's the right thing to do.
Why do you think people struggle to? Why do you think people struggle to step into grief?
Yeah,
so
I think
easily?
For me, I think because I didn't want to go back over those days. I desperately didn't want to go back. My mum died on a Thursday. I desperately didn't want to go back to that day and talk about that day. And your mum was in hospital in Leicester. I didn't want to go through that whole time, or the bit when she'd been poorly before that. And I think I'm very good at, and other people perhaps are good at putting things in boxes. And if I can't sleep of an evening and we think about work, I put everything in a box, then I sit on top of that box, and that's it for me. It's in that box, and that's it. Can't get out. And I want that, and that's for me. And I think a lot of people do that. You put it all in the box, you lock it, and sit on top of it, and then you think, oh, it's gone away. But actually, all you've got are all these massive boxes in your head, and then you go that small box at the end. That tiny box is a trigger. And it can be that box is open, but it's actually down here, all this stuff that needs dealing with.
Yeah.
And I think that's why we don't. I think we kid ourselves. I think it's a very British thing to do, isn't it? We can do it on our own. We can't talk about it. We can't cry because we don't do that. And I think that's why it's important for me to talk to you about this, because it's so right that we talk about it, for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't tell you how many clients I get in here that are of just people get to a certain age, and I'm going to use the age kind of like late 40s, 50s, sometimes 60s, where they arrive and they go, I've managed my life, all of my life, and I've managed really well, and now all of a sudden I can't do it. I'm just like, you're overloaded.
Yeah.
And it's the boxes. And
the
analogy I use is, for every one of those boxes, we are dragging that box with us through life, every box. And I'm like, we have to process some of those boxes and empty them and just let them go. Because then you'll feel lighter.
And I think as well, for me, obviously I went to talk to Barbara about my mum dying, but then there's stuff you talk about that you think's no bearing on it at all. You've got no idea that makes any difference, or there's like you said before, there's a memory from however long ago, which is clearly something you've not thought about, but then that comes into the mix. And I think, again, I can remember thinking, well, what earth we're going to, sort of session 2, 3, 4. Well, I've talked about everything now, but I've clearly got nothing. I'm fixed. I've got nothing to talk about now. And then 45 minutes would go again. And you think, oh, well, clearly there was something else to bring to the table. And I think that's the thing as well, that we're often guilty, or I am, of going for a quick fix. Oh, I've been for 45 minutes. All's good. Done it. That's it. Back to, and it's thinking then, well, actually, no, there is other things you need to talk about and to explore. But then for me, as you'll know, and she was very good at saying, Amy, we've talked about this. There's got to come a time when you've talked about it. We've said, yes, this has happened, and this is how you're going to do that. And I can remember there's one session where she put 2 chairs in the room, and I was still going on about, now it was about the horrible Thursday. But in the end, she said, right, I want you to go sit over there and be the rational Amy that would talk to the irrational Amy over there. And when you're saying things, what would the rational Amy say? And of course, the rational Amy wouldn't say. And she said, then, right, you have to stop now. You have to, there's nothing else you can do. You can't fix everything. You can't, there's no logical explanation for everything. There's some stuff that's just happened. It was what it was. And you have to let that go, because there's nothing to say, oh, well, actually, I can fix it this way.
Yeah. And did the exercise help?
I think so. Yeah. But again, almost by doing that and being busy, you do detract from actually sitting and talking, because while you're being that rational, that while the exercise itself can keep your mind busy, if that makes sense. Yeah. So I can do this. Of course I can do it, but actually I'm not really thinking about it because I'm doing something to keep my mind active rather than actually sitting and talking.
Yeah. And feeling it as well. Really kind of, because sometimes we can talk about it, and I get this a lot with clients where they'll talk and talk and talk, and I'm like, tell me what's happening here.
Yeah.
Tell me how you're feeling. Or, what do you mean? I'm like,
Yeah.
I want to know how your body's feeling right now.
Yeah.
Because there can sometimes be a little bit of a disconnect. And as a therapist, I think we pick up on that because I start feeling, and I'm like, whoa, what's going on here? And I'm like, is this mine? Is it theirs? Whose is this?
Yeah.
And then I check it out with them, and I can't remember what we call it. It's some form of transference where I pick up how I think they maybe should be feeling in that moment when they're
Yeah.
talking about some traumatic event.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then if I reflect that back, they're like, "Oh, is that how I should be feeling?" It's like, well, it's not more. It's not so much a should, but
No.
but there's definitely some sort of disconnect there.
Yeah. And I think I do that even now when I'm going to see a new client and they're desperately upset. You can feel your own, and that's exactly. Am I sad because I'm just being, there? Am I feeling what they're thinking of? Am I, or is it waking up stuff that I need to put away for the moment? I think I can do that. You do pick up on that, but actually, as I said before, that makes me better doing what I do because then
Yeah,
if I can say, look, I found this happened to me, and I get upset. I would originally think, crikey, that's it. Been very unprofessional. I've been, of course, but actually, it doesn't. It makes you that much more of a person to be able to share that.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Have you ever heard of a death cafe?
No.
So death cafe. I can't remember where the concept came from, but I'm not keen on the title. Wendy Baird was talking about developing one of these and wanted a new name, and the new name that somebody came up with was Departure Lounge, which I just thought was brilliant. And so the concept is a group of people arrive together to talk about loss and death. Not a bereavement group as such. They talk about death. And the reason the concept came about was because, as you said earlier, as humans, no, I don't want to say that. I want to say, as British people, we're not very good at talking about death
Yeah.
because some cultures are really good at it.
Yeah.
They're brilliant, but as British people, we are not good. I'm not good at talking about death. So that's where the concept came from. And it was like, let's talk about death. Let's look at it.
Yeah.
Let's face it. Because as we said before we started to record, it's going to happen to us all. And we are all going to experience it as well.
Yeah.
Not just that we are going to leave at some point, but the fact that we are all going to experience that level of loss.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
and I love it as a concept. I love it. I think it's really, again, brave for people to sit and go, okay, let's look death in the eyes and go, let's
Yeah.
have a chat.
I think I would be able to do that now. And I think,
Yeah.
in a group setting, I would be able to do it now. I that would have been too far for me. I think you've
Yeah.
got to know what's best for you.
Yeah.
And I don't think I would have done that. Having said that, my dad, he did that and
Yeah.
I found it ideal. I've got, I had a dear friend that died. Her parents went and did that and found that talking to people in the same situation was what they needed, the same circumstances. And people can say, well, this worked for me. Have you thought about, trying that? It's a bit like when, you've got a new baby and, you've been up all
Yeah.
night and then you meet new mums and they say, oh, I'm the same. And you suddenly think, actually, oh, I am quite normal. It's,
Yeah.
because they've also been up all night. Or they say, well, we've tried this. Have you tried? No, I haven't tried that. I'll take that.
Yeah.
Or someone else suggests something and you think, no, there's no way I want to do that. So we're quite good at that, aren't we? We're quite good at thinking as a new mum, or if there's other things happening, oh, I'll go to a group. That's great. But we're not good at doing group discussions about subjects that make us uncomfortable. And I think death is one of those subjects that people, no, we don't do that. We just get on with it behind closed doors.
Do you think that because when I think about death and loss, and I think about the culture of death and loss, do you see a change in the way that we handle it now?
I think we're getting better at it. And unfortunately, I think given the last few months or last year, I think we are getting better at talking about it because we've had to. Are we halfway there? No. I think we're probably a step in the right direction. Yes. But I still think people think they've got to get on with it themselves, or they mustn't talk about it, or they mustn't ask for help, or actually, everyone needs to do that, but they could still have a story to share. And I think we're not particularly good at that. When an opening comes up, we would close the door and not share, or think, well, that's not my problem. And I think we are stepping in the right direction about being much more open about things, but I don't think we're particularly good at it still.
Yeah, I agree. And when I was talking about change, I was thinking back to my early experiences of kind of loss and death and people passing, and people did just kind of get on with it. They just got on with it. Do you know what I mean? It's like, oh well, that's it now. So the funeral's passed and that's it. So we can all go back to work and but I think when we go back into those generations, it really wasn't discussed and processed and talked about. It was just like, we've just got to get on with it.
Yeah.
That stiff British upper lip.
Yeah, and it's funny, isn't it? But with recent events, looking at the royal family, actually they have that period of mourning that none of the rest of us do. But actually, that period of mourning where you don't do anything, you don't carry out any duties, so you don't go to, that time perhaps it would give you time to do that, to start the process. But the real world isn't like that. You have got to, for a lot of people, you have got to go back to work. There's no, there's nothing. Yes, okay. A lot of employers are fantastic, and you have that time. But there's equally a lot of employers that aren't, and people are expected to deal with that and then get on with life. So we almost don't, because of the circumstances, don't give ourselves that time anyway. We just get on with it, don't we? And I think, like you said about other cultures, you see some of the other cultures when the absolute outpouring of grief. You can think of these cultures where they are very, very vocal and they're absolutely distraught, and that's the normal, to let it all out. Whereas ours is you just stand there and you wear your black and then you carry on. And I think we don't allow ourselves to even do that. And that outpouring that they must have is almost, you always envy them, but you always think, actually, that's right. You've got to wail. You've got to get it all out. And I can remember thinking, that's how I want to be. I want to just let it all out. But actually, I can't. I've got to plan things. I've got to do things, and then I've got to carry on. And I think that's how we are. But I do think it's important to learn, and I do think it's important to be brave enough to say, I need some help. I think that's the first thing, isn't it? I need to talk to someone.
And also brave enough to sit in that pain, because it can be really, really painful and much easier for us to divert onto something else.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there's a lot of physical think involved with grief. I should mention that grief, comes at different points for different people. I'm sure it's with crews that if you arrive at crews too soon, I don't know, if you arrive within a couple of weeks of the loss, they might say to you, that's a little bit...
Sorry.
Hello, cat.
It's too nice to look at the birds, sorry.
For those of you listening to this and not watching this, a cat has just walked across skis. The cat is completely taken to the limelight now. Sorry
about
that. That's not the first time that's happened. You can ask Simon about his. Did exactly the same the other day. So yeah, we have to grief comes at many points, and it can be 3 months, it can be a year, it can be 2 years, but at some point usually there is some sort of pain to kind of deal with. The other thing I wanted to mention was that sometimes I've seen this a lot, where people hold on to grief because they feel if they let go of grief, they're letting go of the person. And actually what we're trying to do is we're trying to separate out the pain from the joy of remembrance.
Absolutely.
And people go, no, I can't do that, because then they'll go, and I'm like, they will never go, and you will never forget who they are and what they brought to your world.
Yeah.
But we have to process that really deep, dark emotion that's attached to it right now.
Yeah, absolutely. That was key for me. That was absolutely key, that I hung on to it. And, there was, for me, when that decision was made, the doctors made that decision, you as a family are involved in that. So for me, there's a huge amount of guilt. It was entirely my fault that the doctor had decided that enough was enough. So there's a huge amount of guilt. And I hung on to that like it was a cloak. I couldn't let go of it, and that was the thing that Barbara said to me. We talked about this, because I had to I couldn't let go of that, because if I let go of that, it almost allowed me then to be absolved of anything, to lay myself bare. But you're absolutely right, and that for me was the key, because when you let go of that and you stop torturing yourself, you stop going over it. And I thought for a long time I would only remember my mum as she was on that Thursday.
Yeah.
And that was awful, because I couldn't remember before. I couldn't remember all that. I remember my mum and I had a really fun, beautiful, close, real friendship and love. I couldn't find that. I'd lost it. I couldn't find it, because I was hanging on to everything else. And it wasn't until I made a conscious decision to park that, to leave it, that then you think, oh, I can remember that. And I do remember that happening. And wasn't that lovely? But you almost think, oh, I must hang on to it. I can't possibly let it go. Else, if I let that go, then, you know, I'm terrible. I'm being a bad daughter because I've forgotten that awful event. When actually letting that go, it was a huge weight off your shoulders. And you can then remember, and you can talk, and you laugh, and you can cry. But with the family and the children, I could go back to that. You know, even now, we can still laugh and remember this, and do you remember that, which keeps their memory alive almost. But I had to, you're absolutely the nail on the head. I couldn't. I thought I'd got to hang on to that. If I let that grief go, then that was it. I was being disloyal. I was, you know, and we're guilty of hanging on to the guilt. For me, that was it for me. I was very guilty of hanging on to all the bad stuff. That's what I had to do. And you've got to get through that, haven't you? You've got to get past that.
Yeah, absolutely. They have to be separated out, so as you can then kind of see and start to feel the good times again. It's like I said about the client earlier, that client couldn't look at a picture of the person that had gone, because the image that was stuck in her head overshadowed the picture, every picture. Because I was like, go look at some pictures, try and kind of like pull back some of those memories, but every picture was it was like it had been photoshopped with this warning.
That's exactly the same for me. All I could see was my mum on that Thursday morning. I couldn't see anything. And you know, like for the children, when they like I said, they went to the bereavement centre, and they said, oh, can you bring some pictures in, can you remember what you did with Nana, what was special for you? And that's the same thing, because they could then bring that. They hadn't been there, you know, we tried to separate them from what had gone on at the hospital. But was that right? No, probably not. And it's things that I sent them to school on the morning of the Thursday morning. And for a long time I thought, crikey, I've been terrible. I'm mum, you know, that's awful. I shouldn't have done that. And Boris said to me, right, you need to go to the children and say, do you think I did the wrong thing? You know, this is how I'm feeling. And of course I didn't. But in my mind, it created this huge problem about all of that. But like you say, going back to the pictures and the things, I couldn't even think about that. You know, what memories do you want to share about Nana and pictures? And all I could see was the Thursday. Couldn't see beyond that. But I could eventually. And I think that's a positive side to get out from all of this, is that yes, it's absolutely awful, but by doing that, you then, you know, I wouldn't be able to talk like this to you about what had gone on. I wouldn't be able to do it. I would have been in a mess. But what a blessing that I can. What a blessing that I can think of my mum now with all those fond memories. And yet, when I'm talking to you, I can feel that, oh, actually, it makes me quite tearful. I could cry. That's not a bad thing. But actually, it's a huge blessing for me that I can now talk about it and remember all the good times. And for me, if there's nothing else, if people could just go and get some help and be able to do that, what a blessing that is.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're definitely, I was thinking earlier before we started recording, I was like, ooh, I wonder if this really has been processed, or whether there will be. But honestly, when you talk about it, you talk about them in such a positive light, and the whole experience almost slightly removed, but it feels very, very positive and processed. Do you know what I mean? There's no kind of acute grief coming across at all. And what I also say to people is, you know, you will probably never stop missing them.
No.
But it's the pain that's attached to that. I lost my parents, both of them, 25 years ago.
Yeah.
And there's not a day goes by that I don't think about them and wish they were here and wish that I could share stuff with them. But it's not painful. It's not a painful. It's just I wish I could share that.
Exactly. That's exactly it. That's exactly it. And actually, when you get that and think, oh, you know, when something's happened with the children, my mum was their biggest champion. She was their biggest, you know, supporter. And when something's happened with one of them, one of my first thoughts is, God, my mum would have been delighted, absolutely. But then to start with, I wouldn't have said that to the children. I'd have just thought, oh no, don't mention it. But now I do mention it, and I say your nana would have been absolutely proud of you, or she'd have been so and I to start with, you think I don't say that because it might upset everybody.
Yeah.
But it might. But actually, it's so important to say that as well. That and like you, every day you think, oh, I wish I could have shared that, or this would have made us laugh, or. But again, going back to that, I'm so thankful that I can do that. That I can think, oh, she'd have really liked this. This would have made her smile. Those sort of things. Because I never thought I'd be able to get to that stage when I could do that. And you do still hang to things. We've got an old telephone, they're old handheld ones, messages that we've still got plugged in, because on there are 2 messages. My mum says, hello, it's only me, just ringing to check in if you're all right. And so it's still there, and I know it's still there. And poor old Nick, we've still got this old telephone. But in my mind, I think grief's different sometimes when because I wasn't living at home. In my mind, sometimes I think she's still there.
Yeah. Because
it's not that everyday reality of her not being. So, but for people that would, like for perhaps my dad, or for people that are so close, that loss is so much bigger, because you get up in the morning and they're not there. Whereas I think the mind's quite clever at disguising it and thinking, well, I'll just give her a ring because she's at home. Of course she's at home. And I think, there is that element in there as well.
A little bit of trickery. What would you like people to take away from this recording? If there was one thing that you really wanted people to hear, what would it be?
2 things, really. To go and get some help. There's help out there. To go and find it. And I would help anybody to find it, to go and get somebody to talk to not try and cope with anything alone. And for those you love as well, for my children, the help that they received was such a blessing. So I think it's opening that door, even if you can only open it a tiny little bit, or you take that first step of saying to somebody, I don't know what to do or how to do it, and to be honest and do it. And the blessings that come with that, are paramount, but it's so important to talk to somebody.
Love that. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time today, and thank you for bringing what can be a pretty sensitive subject to the table, and allowing us both to have a really healthy conversation around that. Thank you.
It's an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for stepping forward with that. So that's it. That's another recording of Invincible You in the bag, so to speak. Remember that if we are not recording subjects that you want us to record, then step forward. If you've got a story to share, then step forward. If you've got a skill in terms of personal growth, then step forward and let's share this, and let's do a recording. Thank you to Home Radio for producing these podcasts. You can get Home Radio on Alexa. Just shout Alexa, enable Home Radio, and she'll find it for you. Or there's 2 apps. There's an Android and a iOS app. I nearly forgot what it was. So you can get them on there, and also they have a website, so you can listen through there. So, and if you think this is going to help somebody else, this recording about grief, then pass it on to them and share it with them, because we like to share the love here, and it's good to get information out there. So that's it. I'll be back next week with another recording. Be kind to yourself and be kind to everybody around you. Thanks again, Amy.
A pleasure. Thank you ever so much.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.